The next topic we want to cover is the physical geography of the Middle American realm. This map figure here shows both the Middle American realm and the South American realm. And we'll talk more about the South American realm later on. But first off, northern part of Mexico is dry, much like the interior of the United States, which lies in a rain shadow. The same applies for the northern part of Mexico, which happens to be in a dry latitude on Earth, and also is somewhat in a rain shadow from both Baja California and mountains that extend across northern Mexico. As we go further to the south, most of southern Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean basin are in the tropics and have tropical climates, which are warm and wet climates. Another thing that characterizes both the Middle American realm, and as we'll see in upcoming lectures, the South American realm, is they're characterized by mountainous landscapes. One is a high plateau, which covers most of northern Mexico. This is actually an extension of a high plateau that covers much of the interior United States, like the area where the Grand Canyon is, for example. That extends into what's called the Mexican Plateau across northern Mexico. As we go further south, however, we get into volcanic mountain ranges, and these are caused because of a series of volcanoes that arise along this edge of southern Mexico, Central America, and extend down through South America. And one key reason for this is that the area of southern Mexico down through South America are on the Pacific Ring of Fire and are on continental plate boundaries that are the type that produce volcanic mountain peaks. So here, if you look at the arrows of movement, you can see that this plate is kind of moving towards southern Mexico and Central America. I don't know if you can see that too good, but the arrow kind of indicates the direction of movement. What's happening at these plate boundaries is that the oceanic crust off the coast is being pushed towards the continents. And as that happens, the oceanic crust is subducted underneath the continent, dragging seawater. And as that happens, the seawater will produce a chain reaction that will melt rock, causing the rock to occur at the surface as volcanic lava. And so that's the process that creates volcanoes. And that process is happening from central Mexico on down through South America. So here this figure shows it a bit better, where you see this black line with the arrows that shows where subduction is happening in Mexico through Central America. And it's also happening all the way down through South America. So next week, we'll be talking about the Andes Mountains. And the Andes Mountains are another good example of where subduction has produced a major mountain range. So this is a scene near Mexico City. And often in many places in Latin America, if you look in the background, you can see a number of high volcanic peaks. This is due to this chain of volcanoes that occurs along the Pacific Ring of Fire. This is a terrain map of Central America, and one thing notable is that there's a variety of different elevations because of these chains of volcanic peaks that occur on through Central America in various locations. All right, now the next topic I want to talk about is called altitudinal zonation. And this is going to be an important part of your learning outcomes for this section. Altitudinal zonation is the concept that because of changes in elevation, if you recall, the things that affect climate are latitude, position within a landmass, and elevation. And here elevation plays a role directly in producing different climates where we have these mountainous volcanic peaks, such that you have these different types of natural environments, such as tropical rainforests at the bottom, and other types of environments, including ice and snow at the very top. And along these places, you also have different types of agriculture, such as tropical crops here at the lowest elevations, up to more moderate climate crops as you go further up. And this concept of having different environments at different elevations is collectively called altitudinal zonation. Now specifically, I want to go over the zones that are named as part of this altitudinal zonation. So these are names that are in Spanish that describe these different zones of agriculture in highland areas. And each one, we're going to go over them one at a time. Each one has a different sort of climate and a different sort of agriculture that happens there, or a different environment. Let's start with the very bottom here. And this is particularly true in the tropics, where at the very bottom, you have your typical tropical environment. This is called the tierra caliente. And the type of agriculture that goes on here is primarily plantation, a type of commercial agriculture. And what's grown here are hot tropical crops such as sugarcane or banana plantations, as shown here. As we move up into a cooler, higher altitude, we get into the tierra templada. I should mention, by the way, that the tierra caliente means the hot zone. The tierra templada is the temperate zone, which lies above the tierra caliente. Here again, this is also primarily used for commercial or plantation agriculture, but the crop is different. Here, the primary crop that's grown is coffee, because coffee grows better at cooler, higher elevations. As we move upward from the tierra templada, we get into the tierra fria. And the tierra fria is where we start to get away from plantation or commercial agriculture into subsistence agriculture. This is primarily places where people grow their own food and sustain themselves using small gardens or small farms at high elevation. It's not that people wouldn't probably prefer to grow food at lower elevations, but much of that land is taken up by commercial activity, leaving the tierra fria to indigenous people to grow their own food. So traditionally, crops such as corn, potatoes, and other things are grown at these higher elevations where you tend to have higher concentrations of people who sustain themselves by growing their own food. By the way, most of the high plateau in Mexico lies in the zone of the tierra fria. As we move up from there, we get into a colder zone, the tierra helada, which is cold and has very limited agriculture. Most of the agriculture is limited to grazing, such as these llamas here in South America. This is a high altitude zone that is primarily applies to the Andes in South America, which are taller mountains than those typically found in Mexico or Central America. And as we go even higher than that, we get into the icy peaks of mountains, and this is called the Tierra Nevada. This is where we're above the snow line, and we're limited to snow and ice. Again, these mostly apply to the Andes Mountains in South America. So just to review, we have the Tierra Caliente at the bottom. This is the hottest zone with hot plantation crops such as sugarcane. The Tierra Templada, where we tend to have coffee plantations. The Tierra Fria, this is primarily where we have subsistence agriculture. The Tierra Helada, where it's limited to livestock grazing. And the Tierra Nevada, which are the ice-covered mountain peaks.